Okay. Well, good morning. Good to see you all. Hope your Thanksgiving was fantastic. Mine was great. It was pretty quiet, but we got to play some games, which I always love. Now, some of you, the holidays are actually really tough. So if it was a tough moment for you, just know that we're praying for you. We're thinking about you. And if you need somebody to come alongside you in this difficult time around the holidays, where we're reminded of the losses of the past, you can let us know, and we'd love to walk with you in prayer on that front. My name's Robby. If you don't know me, I'm one of the associate pastors here. I'm glad to be with you. Thrilled to be able to preach with you today. My wife Emmy and I were talking just the other day. This is a little anecdote I want to start with. We were just talking about movies when we were little kids, younger, and the movies that we would memorize lines from. Like, you just know a whole ton of lines, maybe as a comedy. Dumb and Dumber is a big one for me. I just recite all those lines. Emmy said one. I can't remember what it was. It was some lame rom-com. She's down there. She's going to get me later. But, mine was the awesome movie Braveheart, of course. I was told of Braveheart. I know all these lines from Braveheart. Some of you guys are like, oh, gosh, Braveheart. That's cheesy, too. That's a cheesy name, Braveheart. But it's a great movie. It's got lots of action. It's got a love story, and it's really, really long, so you, know it's good. But Braveheart, there's this a speech in Braveheart that I've memorized, and I bet you some of you guys, if you watched it, if you're like me and you watched it a lot, you've probably memorized. And William Wallace is this guy who is trying to free Scotland from England, and he's raising an army. And the first battle scene, there's a Scottish army on one side and the English army on the other side. And the English army is decked out. They're all ready for battle. They have armor, and they have horses, they have spears and swords. And the Scottish army is like farmers, and they kind of have some swords, but it's mostly farming equipment. And so they're just not ready for battle. And so they get scared, and they start to leave. And then William Wallace rides in on his horse and rallies the troops. And he says, why are you leaving? Why do you flee, he says. And the response from the Scottish army is, we're going home because the English are too many. And Wallace looks back at him, and this is the famous line that I could quote. He says, I fight and you may die. Run and you'll live at least a while. And then he says this is one of my favorite parts. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that you may take our lives, but you'll never take our freedom? And he cheers, and everybody screams, and then they go off to fight, and they win the battle. And at least I think they win the battle. But that's the famous one that I remember. And most of the time when I quote that to people, if they remember any of it, they'll remember, they'll never take our freedom. And he cheers. He's got blue face paint on and stuff. But for me, it's not that freedom line necessarily that gets me. It's this line. He says, run and you'll live at least a while. And that's a recurring theme. Later, Wallace says, every man dies, not every man truly lives. And so that stuck with me, that line and that idea. And we're going to circle back to it as we kind of go through this text. The passage for today is from the book of Psalms. It's from Psalm chapter 2, and we're going to read it in a second, but I want to give you an idea of what's it all about as we dive into it. But before I even look at the psalm, I want to give you sort of the main idea for today. So the takeaway for today, the main point, if you will, is that that the only way for you and I, for each of us, to find true life, to truly live, like Wallace says, is in glad submission to the one true King. Glad submission to the one true King. All right, so that's the point, but we're going to circle around to it. The passage for today is Psalm 2. The Psalms are part of the Old Testament, not part of the New Testament. And it means they were written for ancient Israel, this ancient community of people in the midst of a lot of other kingdoms all around and the ancient world. And the Psalms are sort of this incredible storehouse for all of us and for the Israelites of prayer and worship and comfort and longing and lament and conversations with God. And we've used it, the church has used it for thousands of years, but the Israelites used it back then, and for them it was all those things: worship, prayer, praise, mourning, all those things. But in a very real way for Israel, the Psalms shaped their public life, not just their faith life, but their public life as well. So Israel was established as a kingdom, first under David. David and Goliath, he kills the king, or kills the giant, and then it later becomes king. And Israel was ruled by kings for years, but all the while Israel was supposed to be a witness to the nations about God. They're supposed to point people to God. They're supposed to make God's name great in the world. And that fact that they had a job to do for God, it meant that their nation, their sort of geopolitical reality, was linked, like intrinsically connected. Their faith and their politics and their nation state was connected. So they were God's vessel. So kingdom and faith were interconnected and bound together for Israel. And the Psalms reflect that. They connect that political task with the divine task of being a nation that's about the business of witnessing to God and his goodness. So in this case, Psalm 2 is what they call a coronation psalm. What's a coronation? It's the crowning of a new king. So they would use it in their public worship where the whole community would gather around, the whole kingdom would gather around, and they would crown a new king. And the psalm has this sort of dramatic flair to it. There's like a couple speaking parts, which I'll try to illustrate to you. And there's God, who is the narrator, and then there's small k kings, like lesser kings of other nations all around. And then there's the anointed king, God's chosen king, who speaks as well. So there's like these multiple parts at play going on here. And so with that in mind, let me read Psalm chapter 2. It's 12 verses long. I'm going to read through all of it, knowing that Israel would have used this as a coronation in the midst of their public life. Psalm chapter 2. Why do the nations rage? This is God talking. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings, lowercase k, the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Anointed is God's chosen king. Against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds. Let's break free from this kingdom, this divinely appointed king. Let's burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. That's God laughing. The Lord holds them in derision. He will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I've set my king, capital K, king, on Zion, on my holy hill, that's Jerusalem. I have a king in Jerusalem, God's saying. And then here comes the king himself, the anointed king, and he talks. This is God's chosen king, not small k king, big K king. Verse 7 says, I will tell of the decree the Lord said to me. You are my son, today I have begotten you. It's sort of this divine right of kingship in play here. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, O kings, be wise. This is God talking again. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. And then it ends with this little beatitude. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Okay, so there's 3 points. I gave you the main point, but I'm going to walk through it in 3 points for us here. First point is this. There is a true king who is God, and he lays claim on your life. The second point is all of us, we all plot and rage and rebel against this true king. And the third point is this. There is no refuge from this king, only refuge in the king. So the first point, there is a true king who is God, and he lays claim on your life. So as we look at this passage, what's going on? Well, like I said, there are these nations surrounding God's kingdom, surrounding Israel, plotting and scheming and raging. And there's God setting up his own kingdom with his anointed king. It's an allusion to when David gets oil poured on him by the prophet Samuel, and so God's chosen vessel. And we get this sense in the passage of sort of this geopolitical tension. We picture a new powerful king getting crowned in Jerusalem, but all the other kings, small k kings around him, are kind of in an uproar. They're plotting and they're scheming and they're ready to upend this new king. They're like, now's our chance. We can take this throne. And so that's the scene, but notice what's going on here. Think about kings for a second, small k kings. They're used to getting their way, right? Those foreign kings that are plotting and scheming, they're rulers of other nations. They're around Israel, and they're used to being in charge. That's what makes being a king, right? What you say goes. Rulers rule. So look at how God talks to kings. God sits back and laughs. And he holds them in derision. And I kind of read through these lines. Derision is like contempt. It's like mocking. You read through these lines, and God kind of comes across as kind of tough, kind of like rubs you the wrong way a little bit if you're not careful. Why? And you kind of have to ask the question, why does the Psalms present God in this way? Why say when God talks, he says he laughs? Why hold them in derision? Why speak with them with wrath and terrifying fury? Why are they like presenting God in this way? Well, I believe that Psalms 2 here, the second psalm, is trying to present a point. It's trying to illustrate an important point for all of us. And the point is that these kings aren't really kings, not in any ultimate sense. See, kings don't get talked to that way. Real kings who are worthy of the title don't get mocked. They're not laughed at. They don't get held in derision. So why does God mock? Why does God laugh? The writer of Psalm 2 is trying to show us who the real king is. They're not kings. God is the one true king. So that's a huge point we got to take away. And as we look at this passage, our mind can go a couple different places as we take it out of the context of ancient Israel and place ourselves in the seat, as we let it speak to us in our moment. We can look at the world around us and the powers that be that assert themselves on us, right? We can look at the governments and the dictators and the mayors and the rulers and the politicians, and all of them are plotting and scheming and trying and claiming that their way is going to make the difference, right? Elect this guy and the world's problems are going to go away. Vote this way and everything's going to be okay. Listen to my position. If you would just do what I say, it's all going to go well in the end. It's all plotting and scheming, just like in this passage. We see that all the time played out, but the incredible thing is it always happens, and we always fall for it. We always are getting lured into the next politician, the next great person, the next great thing, the next whatever it is, right? But why? Why do we fall for it? Why do we get caught up in this jockeying for kingship in the world, if you will? Why are we obsessed with it? Why do we fall for it? Why is it always part of our life and story? Tim Keller makes a really good point. He says there's something in us that's attracted to this like myth of kingship in the world. Like there's something that's written inside us, just kind of craves kingship. Think of Arthur and Camelot, right? The great legend of Arthur, the great King Arthur. Think of Robin Hood and King Richard, who's off but will come back, the good King Richard, right? Think of a lot of civilizations are built on these myths of great kings who brought in golden ages, but it's been lost. Well, you say, well, we're a democracy here. This is America. We're a republic. We're not ruled by kings. And that's true, right? And that's a great blessing of democracy. We kind of realize none of us would make much good of king. We wouldn't be very good kings. But still, even here, we have this sort of internal, like, draw to kingship that captivates our hearts and our sensibilities. It's still here. Just think about how we elevate athletes or celebrities or our obsession with royalty. Even though like we're not under a king, we still get obsessed with like princes and princesses and things like that. Something is written in us. So why all this obsession? It's because we long for a world that's made right by a good king. A good king. Because that's how it was in the beginning. That's how we were created to be. That's what is written in our hearts from long, long ago. The good king will return. We long for the world to be made right again. Our hearts long for that good king. All right, so we got that in play as well. We long for kings, but notice how this passage still rubs against our hearts in some ways. We get that we kind of have this longing for kings, but then they talk. This is how God talks. This is how a king actually talks to us. Verse 10 says, "Be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and trembling. Rejoice Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in his way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. And go back to the derision and the mocking. There's something in this. We want kings, but we don't want to be talked to that way. It's uncomfortable. I desire a king, but not a king like this, it seems. It's not a gentle, wooing king. All the verbs in that passage right there from 10, 11, and 12, they're all imperative verbs. That means that they are commands. God goes from sort of talking and sort of just thinking and sort of stream of conscience to actually giving commands to everybody. Again, if you're those scheming kings who are used to being in charge, it doesn't feel good. But if I'm being honest, I don't like it either. God's saying to me, to you, if we put ourselves in this moment, submit to me. God is saying, serve me and do it out of fear and trembling. It doesn't rub me the right way. I don't know about you. It certainly doesn't bode well for marketing for God, right? Well, here's what's going on in this passage. I think it's important to understand Psalm 2 here. This passage is not trying to convince you. It's not trying to woo you. It's not trying to win you over. It's simply just stating it. It's asserting itself. It's saying, this is how it is. Deal with it. Again, even saying that, deal with it, kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do, I don't know. You just don't like it, right? In other words, this passage is actually meant to rub you the wrong way. It's meant to jolt you, to shake you, to trigger something inside of you. It's meant to trigger the realization in each of us that we are the rebels. That we are the rebels in this thing. We are the defiant, small k kings, resisting the one true king that is God. We're the ones scheming, plotting, the treacherous ones in this passage. We're the rabble at the beginning who is raging against our king. We don't like how God is talking to you right now, and I know I don't. I literally had to wrestle with this. I'm like, why is God talking like this? I don't like it because I don't like being ruled. So that brings us to our second point. We plot, and we rage, and we rebel against the one true king. All of us, we long for that true kingship, but not like this. None of us want to be ruled, particularly by God. But God does lay a claim on us. Like even in this passage, God is claiming your life. He says, you, me, each of us, were confronted by the fact of this passage, by the scripture speaking to us, that he's the creator. He's making claims on our life. He's commanding us. He can rule over us. He can put us in our place. He can call us to the floor. We don't like that. None of us like that. We resist that idea of God laughing at me, deriding me, telling me what to do. So what do we do in response? Well, for one, we plot, right? We plot. And whether it's an intentional plot or to get around God or subconscious, whatever it is, we all try to do it some way or another. We try to pull one over on God. How can I get my way while making God think he's getting his way? Like, what can I do to, sneak this by? See, we see this all the time. A really obvious one is in dating relationships. Like, you're in college, you're in high school, or you're beyond that, you're thinking about getting married, whatever it is, and you ask the question of boyfriend and girlfriend come together, say, how far is too far? Let me see if I can plot my way around God's commands in this, or around the way God has designed it. How do I plot my way through that? That doesn't feel good because we know what we want. We do what we want to do. But God has something else in mind. He's God. Again, I'm just showing you that this thing rubs against our natural disposition. Or the other ways we plot is in business, right? We know what we say to ourselves, well, this is just what the law allows. We can do this. This is within the law. But really, you know that the law is giving you way more latitude than you need right now, and you're taking advantage of somebody in the midst of this. Or maybe your conscience comes in when your team says, hey, we got to run a business here. We don't have room for sob stories. But God's calling you to compassion, to treat people as people, to understand them, right? Or that line where your skills is maybe with stocks and the stock market edges away from just sort of savvy business to maybe a little bit of addictive gambling habits, right? Treating stocks as gambling. You know that line, whatever it is. It could be business, it could be dating, it could be 100 other things, how you parent, whatever it is. But we all plot to try to pull one over on God. We also respond with rage. Rage is different than like honest anger. So like honest anger, you can be angry with God. That's okay. Just like I can be angry with my wife and kids. Anger speaks of relationship. I get angry at my wife and kids, but if I handle it well, I can talk to them. We can sort it out. We can say how we've hurt each other. We can say where this feeling is coming from. But rage is a different story. It's like, I just think of my kids, they go into a rage. Some might call it a fit. They've been watching shows for like on their screens or on their TV for way too long. And I've been trying to tell them, get off. So I just come up and turn it off. Maybe that's not the best move, I don't know. But I turn it off and they freak out, right? They're stomping, they're screaming. And then eventually comes the line, that's not fair. That's not fair. See, our rage comes out when we can't manage our own reactions to the world around us. This happens all the time, even with adults. And we see injustice in the world, corruption, manipulation around us. And it feels like all this injustice, all this corruption, all the things that are going wrong is just too much. And so we decide to take justice into our own hands. We justify our actions. We say, God has to be out there and God wants justice. And God, if you don't do something, I will. So we loot and we riot and we take justice into our own hands and we say it's making it fair. So we rage. Next, we rebel. And this is the heart of it. This is the root of it. We all eventually say goodbye to God and go our own way. We're on our own and He's not a part of it. We reject God. That's one of the central insights of Christianity, all right? Like, this is core to the Christian message, that our natural human condition wants to rebel against God. We want to go it alone without God. That is a key central insight to Christianity. When you say, hey, I'm in church, man. I haven't rejected God. I'm here, aren't I? I'm watching online, whatever it is. Well, we might not outright reject Him. We don't say we're on our own, no more God, but we rebel in our own ways if we call ourselves Christian. George MacDonald, who is an author that inspired C.S. Lewis, he wrote this. He said, the one principle of hell is that I am my own. I thought that was a great quote, so here it is in its entirety. I go and look it up and listen to what it says. If Jesus is a king, this is the quote, didn't know the king part was there. It says, if Jesus is a king, He deals the death blow to the powers of hell. And the one power of hell, the one principle of hell, is that I am my own. I'm my own king and my own subject. My own glory is and ought to be my chief care. My ambition to gather the regards of men to the one center which is myself. My pleasure is my pleasure. My kingdom is as many as I can bring to the knowledge of my greatness over them. My judgment is faultless. My right is all that I desire. The one principle of hell is that I am my own. And we say, I'm a Christian, I don't go that far. Really? This happens all the time with us, with me. I'm praying to God, and God's laying something on my heart that I need to do, and I say, thanks, God, but no thanks. I hear you. Yeah, I get it. Like, I prayed. I heard what you said. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm not doing that. I'm going my way. I'm doing my thing. Thanks, but no thanks, God. I know you want me to be generous. I know you want me to sacrifice a little bit. I know you want me to give more. Thanks, but no thanks. I know you want me to be less selfish with my time and love my kids more and be more proactive in my community. Thanks, but no thanks, God. God, I know you want me to make faith a priority in my household and prioritize worship and try to give back to the kingdom that you're building through church, but it's cold outside and I'd rather stay home. Thanks, but no thanks, God. Sorry, you guys are good on that one, though, because it's Thanksgiving and, like, you're here, so great job. Good job. If that rubs you the wrong way, email Dave, okay? Sorry, buddy. Okay, another sly way that we rebel, and this is kind of subtle, but it's really, really important, is we actually just try to be moral. We avoid Jesus. We rebel against God by just being moral. What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Well, do you sometimes look around at the world around you or watch somebody on TV or on your news feed or whatever it is, or just passing somebody in your life, and you subtly, whether you like it or not, it kind of comes out at you that you think you're better than that person? You have this subtle sense that you're good and Jesus must be happy with you. You wouldn't say it that way, but it's in there, right? You might say, hey, I'm a pretty good guy. I love my wife. I help my kids. I'm pretty successful. I'm wise. My yard's really clean. So I don't have to worry about what Jesus is trying to correct in me because I am good. There's nobody good but God. Scripture teaches us that. Don't you see? Don't you see that whether you're in open rebellion to God or hiding in your perfect suburban, moral, clean life, you're saying to God, not your will, my will. Now, that's the central insight of Christianity. But it's God we're talking about. The psalm forces us on to that fact. This is God, the one true king. God is God. He is a king. And we may resist. We may rage. We may rebel. But the text confronts us. He is the one who rules. He is the one with whom we need to bow. He is the one who our hearts owe its devotion. He's in charge. He's our master. He's our creator. He lays claim on us. And God's not a pushover. This matters. There are consequences when rebelling against a king. This world that he made is going to collapse on you one way or another. Just a matter of time. Dave spoke a couple weeks ago about the storms. Those things are coming. The world is going to come on you. And the weight of God's judgment will come on us, whether now or in 30, 40 years on your deathbed. Eventually, those horrible words of Jesus will come to haunt you. And if you read these, this is Jesus talking. If they don't haunt you, they should. Jesus says, on the day of judgment, there is judgment from a king. If there wasn't judgment, he wouldn't be a king. Not a good one, at least. He says, on that day, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then Jesus responds, then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. On that day, that horrible day, where we come face to face with our Creator and our Master who lays claim on all people, when that day comes, there's part of me that I know will rejoice. And there's part of me that's just terrified of it. And if there isn't terror in us, we don't know the King. So that brings us to our third and final point. There's no refuge from this King. You can't run from him. You can't hide from him. There's only refuge in the King. There's only refuge in the King. See, this is a coronation psalm, yes, but it's actually a divine coronation psalm. It was for ancient Israel, but it's also a prophetic psalm that points to something else. It points to Jesus. It points to Jesus. Back to that word anointed I had mentioned, the anointed, Hebrew word for Messiah. The anointed. You take Messiah, the Hebrew word, anointed, you translate it into the Greek, and the Greek word becomes Christ. Christ. Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus, the anointed one. Jesus, the Christ. It's a title, not his last name. From the very beginning, the church recognizes, from the very start, you go to Acts, we just finished up Acts, chapter 4 of Acts, all these crazy things are happening. Jesus is raised from the dead. Crowds are coming to believe. Peter, the apostle, is freed from jail miraculously. And all gather around and they recite this psalm. A psalm that they had recited for their whole lives, that they thought was just a coronation psalm, but they knew was pointing to a bigger, greater king somewhere in the future. Jesus is our king, and he is a good king. It's in him that you can find your refuge. It's in him that you find your shelter. What does all this mean? What do we do with all this? What is this? Because you're coming in from off the street. Maybe this is the first time in church in a long time. And you're like, geez, I didn't think I was going to get the whole judgment and like fear, trembling thing today. We're going to make it through. It's going to be okay. But maybe those moments where we've been walking through this and it rubs you the wrong way, it strikes at your sort of heart. Maybe there's a reason for that. Because now we know that the bad news is bad, but the good news is even better, right? It's bad news because we realize after reading this psalm that we are the schemers, we're the rebels, we're the rage-filled mob, raging against God, the true king. It's bad because this king is not just some imaginary king. It was a real king. It was Jesus who we crucified and beat and whipped and tortured and killed. It's bad news for us rebels. But it's even better than we hope, because it turns out that King Jesus rose from the dead to conquer sin and death, to bring us back to God, the one himself who served us and bled for us, who showed us the way, who united us back to the Father, who will one day come as the good King to make all things new again. The one who triumphed over death and welcomes us into his family as his own sons and daughters. Don't you see? The bad news is bad, but the good news is even better. So what do? What do you do? What do I do when I'm scheming? What do I do when I'm plotting? What do I do when I'm raging against God because life is unfair? Do I run from him, or do I run to this King? Listen to how these verses end. I'm going to read it again, this time in the Message version. This psalm at the end implores us, and more than implores, it commands us to run to him. He is our only hope. So, rebel kings, it says, that's you and me. Use your heads. I like that. Use your heads, you upstart judges. Learn your lesson. Worship Jesus in adoring embrace. Celebrate in trembling awe. Kiss the Messiah. Your very lives are in danger, you know. His anger is about to explode. But if you make a run for God, you won't regret it. That final line, that beatitude, again in the ESV it says, blessed are all who take refuge in him. So we bristle at the idea of being ruled, but it's in our submission, our glad submission to him, that we find true blessings in our lives, and not blessings in service, in service, in rejoicing, having a holy fear of him, adoring him in worship. We find that we are blessed. And it's not a blessing like you get your car or you get some magic wish like God is some genie. No, he's the King. But it's that blessing that means you find purpose and meaning and identity, worth and value and redemption. It's when you're under the wings of that King, the good King who sits above all other kings, that you can find peace and freedom and joy. And it's in him, this Advent season, we're leaning into the season of Advent. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and maybe you need his peace today. There's no other king that you can turn to. We can take refuge. We can't take refuge from him, but we can take refuge in him. Let me just leave you with this. You didn't think I was going to get around to it, but let me paraphrase William Wallace again. What will you do without God? And you might say, well, I'm going to run and I'm going to live my life. And to that I say, sure, run. You'll live at least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for just one chance to put aside your scheming and your running and your raging and your rebellion, and instead find freedom in the one true King? May it be so this day and every day. Amen.
Won't you join us and stand?